Hello, friends, and welcome to today's Sutta class. It seems there was a little technical glitch at the moment, but I hope we are live and you can all hear me. So good to see you all a few days before Christmas. So it's so nice to see that you still have found the time to tune in. And we will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join in if you like. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, welcome to today's Sutta class. We will continue exploring our topic about conflict resolution strategies of the Buddha. And last time we have started talking about a very famous conflict in the Buddha's time, which is the schism in Kosambi, where two monks started quarreling about cleaning the bathroom. And then the whole thing escalated and turned into a massive conflict and then into a massive schism of the sangha and a disruption in the community life and a split of the sangha into two groups that went on for a few months until they were finally able to resolve this and to restore community harmony. And so over the course of the next few weeks, we will explore how the sangha dealt with this and how the Buddha dealt with this and the various approaches he used to restore unity and to create a kind of reconciliation, and the various approaches that he tried and failed, and finally what happened until the sangha reconciled. So last time we started with this topic, and last time we got a little overview. And for those who don't quite remember the story, we can briefly summarize it. So what happened is that there were two monks, two quite famous and senior elders of the community. One of them was a sutta scholar and one of them was a Vinaya scholar. And so the sutta expert one day used the bathroom, and after he had come out, the Vinaya expert went and used the bathroom, and he was not quite happy with the state that he found the bathroom in. So he went and talked to the sutta scholar, and he claimed that the sutta scholar had committed an offense by not cleaning up properly after himself. So this is how the whole thing started, a minor dispute between two people about cleaning the bathroom, and that turned into a schism. So the Vinaya scholar said this was a minor offense, and the sutta scholar thought that one of the exceptions to the offense apply, so that it's not an actual offense. And then the students of those two teachers got involved and started fighting with each other. And eventually the whole thing escalated and more monks got involved. And after all the monks got involved, the lay community also got involved, and everybody formed opinions, and they split into two groups. And then the Bhikkhuni Sangha also got involved and formed opinions and split into groups. And the text tells us that the Devas also split into two groups. And even people who were not even Buddhist heard about the incident. And the whole of Kosambi basically had opinions about this matter and started quarreling with each other. So it turned into a massive, massive issue. And at this point, the Buddha heard about it, and he went and he made his first attempt at reconciliation. And what he did first is he went and tried to talk to both of these groups individually. So what had happened is that the Vinaya group got so upset with the Sutta group that the Sutta expert was not confessing that offense, that they had actually expelled him from the Sangha. So that is a fairly major act. And normally you obviously don't do that for such a small minor offense. You only do that for people who are repeatedly and continuously creating trouble in the sangha. So doing that for such a small thing already shows how much they were attached to their own views. But because the sutta group didn't think that this was an offense to begin with, they thought that the expulsion was illegitimate, because obviously you cannot expel a monk that is innocent. So the sangha split into two groups, and that's how the schism started. Because when you expel somebody, then you can't do the various procedures together with them. You can't do the sangha kamas together. You can't do the patimokkha recitation, the recitation of the monastic code together. You can't live together. You can't eat together. So that person is really expelled from the group. And because the students and followers of the sutta monk were still doing all these things together with him, the sangha had split into two groups, and that is when the schism happened. So the Buddha, first of all, tried to talk to each of those two groups individually and tried to show them the bigger picture, tried to get them to look at the point of view of the other persons, tried to sort of make them consider the overarching consequences that the conflict had on the entire community of Kosambi, instead of just narrowly clinging to their own view of what the problem was. So first of all, he went and he talked to the group of the Vinaya scholar who had done that expulsion ceremony. And so he told them that when you do this kind of expulsion, then you need to consider not only whether or not that person has committed some kind of offense, but also you need to consider the character of the person, and you also need to consider the consequences of the expulsion. So obviously, if there is somebody in the sangha who constantly creates problems, then it is proper to do an expulsion ceremony. But if there is a person who is genuinely a good practitioner, who has practiced for a very long time, who is very accomplished, who is a sutta expert, who is a revered teacher, a leader of the sangha, who has many students and many lay followers, and you know that they actually have very wholesome intentions and they have actually committed their entire life to the practice of the Dhamma, in that case, it is very inappropriate to use such a small incident to actually expel them from the sangha. Because that will not only create a lot of problems for that person who has practiced for such a long time, who has dedicated themselves to Dhamma practice for such a long time, and they have no other intention in life other than practicing Dhamma, and obviously don't really want to go anywhere else and don't really have any other place to go. But it also creates a lot of problems with the followers of that person. They will not understand why you did the expulsion, because they see that that person is actually a good person and is actually a genuine Dhamma practitioner. So that will lead to a lot of conflict. That will lead to a lot of people losing faith in the sangha, and that will just mean that your expulsion ceremony doesn't actually lead to the objective that you want to obtain. When you do an expulsion, you want to remove a bad person from the sangha so that you have more unity and more harmony in the sangha, and there will be less disturbance. But if you expel a good person, obviously the conflict and the disturbance will be more, because there will be so many debates and so many people will not understand what you're doing. So this is what he told to the group of the Vinaya scholar, to take into account the qualities of the person that you're expelling. If that is a wholesome person and a genuine practitioner, you really shouldn't expel them. And also, if that is a very eminent leader, then and all the followers will not understand what you're doing, you're creating so much damage to the faith in the Dhamma of so many people. So that is what you should consider. And that's what he told to the Vinaya group. And then he went and talked to the Sutta group. And then he told them, when somebody admonishes you and gives you advice on Vinaya rules, then you also need to consider the kind of person that is talking to you and giving you advice. Obviously, it could be a person who is constantly harassing you, who's just trying to make trouble for you, who's just trying to pick on you and being hostile towards you. In that case, you can obviously fairly easily dismiss what they are saying as being illegitimate criticism. But if the person who is admonishing you is a very senior leader of the community and is a Vinaya expert, then you should take their advice very seriously. And if they are telling you that this is an offense, then you should really consider whether you can actually make amends for this offense. Even if you yourself believe that it isn't really an offense, you should take their advice very seriously. And also you have to consider the consequences of you not making amends, you or not clearing that offense. So if that sutta scholar had actually gone ahead and cleared the offense and just confessed it, that confession would have taken less than a minute and the conflict would have ended right then and there. As it was, the whole thing dragged on and on for many months, and there was so much disruption to the practice of the entire community. And if the sutta scholar had taken that into account, he could have very easily just confessed the offense, even though he doesn't really believe it was an offense, just out of respect for the Vinaya scholar who is an expert in these kind of questions. So this is what the Buddha told to the sutta group. Unfortunately, both of the groups didn't listen to the Buddha. Both of the groups were not able to see the bigger picture, were not able to see that their specific points of view were actually quite minor compared to the consequences of that massive conflict that was the consequence of their actions. So both of them very stubbornly clung to their own views and were not able to let that go. Were not able to see the other person's point of view and were not able to see what the Buddha was pointing towards. So this was the first attempt of the Buddha to resolve the conflict, and he was unsuccessful. And as a consequence, things got worse and worse. And instead of just fighting with each other verbally, these two groups started abusing each other verbally and eventually also started getting physical with each other. So things got very violent and very hostile, as conflicts tend to do over time. So if you leave your emotions and your defilements unchecked, they start to get worse and worse. And this is exactly what happened. And then the Buddha again stepped in and made his second attempt. And he realized that at this point it had gone too far. People were not reachable by any words or by any kind of reason. So what he had to do at this point was to physically separate the two groups. So his second advice, or at this point his Vinaya rule that he laid down, was that those two groups need to be physically separated from each other as much as possible. And because at this point, the Sangha was still, both Sanghas, both groups, were still using the same kind of facilities. They were still both living at Kosambi, so they were using the same Dhamma halls, the same Dana salas, the same facilities and the same buildings and lodgings and sleeping quarters and so on. So they were constantly in contact with each other, and they constantly had to see each other. And of course, that constantly triggered their defilements in the mind. And so the Buddha made the rule that the two groups need to be separate, and if they have to use the same building, they need to have a space in between them. So he made the rule that if they have to sit down, then there has to be at least one seat that is empty in between the two groups, so they can't get close to each other. And that obviously prevents them from being physically violent with each other, but also it prevents them from actually getting in contact so much. So just to give everybody the opportunity to not be constantly triggered and to actually calm down their emotions a little bit so that they are, again, reachable by reason and reachable by Dhamma teachings. So this was the Buddha's second attempt at resolving the situation. It was also unsuccessful, and the monks continued to fight. And at this point now, the Buddha is teaching. The Buddha is calling everybody together and giving a formal Dhamma teaching, a formal discourse, namely the sutta at Kosambi, the Kosambiya Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 48. And this is what we are reading today. And so the Buddha's first attempt was to talk to everybody separately. When that failed, he tried to physically separate them. And now he's trying another approach, giving them a proper, official, formal Dhamma teaching. And the Kosambiya Sutta is a very beautiful sutta. And It's also quite a long sutta, so probably today we will only read the first half of this sutta and do the second half next time. And I have given you a link in the live chat to Bhante Suchatra's translation on Sutta Central, because Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation is not on there, but I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation because I like it so much, because I think it's very, very beautiful. And so if you want to read along, there should be a link there. And this sutta comes in two parts. And the first part is the Buddha teaching about communal harmony. So laying down a few basic principles, how you can establish harmony in a community. And of course, that's applicable to Dhamma communities, but it's also applicable to any kind of community that you want to form, in any kind of group where you want to have a good cohesion and, well, a unity in the community. And after the Buddha has laid down those 6 principles, he gives a teaching about stream entry. So this is a very unique teaching. It's not found anywhere else in the canon, only in this sutta. So it's very special. And what the Buddha is trying here is, first of all, giving them a way out of the conflict by teaching the principles of community harmony. And then he's showing them how beneficial that would be for everyone. Because obviously, when you have community harmony, everybody can practice properly, and then stream entry and the higher stages of the path are within reach. If you continue fighting, obviously the path is blocked for everyone, because the defilements in the mind would just be so strong that nobody has the peace of mind to make any progress. So in a monastic community, obviously everybody has gone forth because they want to make progress in the Dhamma. So what the Buddha is showing here is that nobody can reach their objective if they continue fighting. So for everybody, it's actually better to end this conflict and to establish harmony, so that everybody can make progress in the Dhamma. And so the Buddha, by showing this ideal of stream entry and showing that that would be within reach if they made the effort to reconcile, he's trying to guide them towards greater community harmony and towards helping them overcome this conflict. So let's start reading this sutta. And Bhikkhu Bodhi's version goes as follows. Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Kosambi in Gosita's park. Now on that occasion, the bhikkhus at Kosambi had taken to quarreling and brawling, and were deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. They could neither convince each other, nor be convinced by others. They could neither persuade each other, nor be persuaded by others. So this is the brief summary of this schism that had happened until now. And as we can see, this text also confirms that they were really verbally abusive towards each other, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. And neither of them was able to let go of their own view, and they were not able to convince and persuade each other and to come to some kind of common understanding, as we have seen. So, and then a certain bhikkhu went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and informed him of what was happening. Then the Blessed One addressed a certain bhikkhu thus: Come, bhikkhu, tell those bhikkhus in my name that the teacher calls them. Yes, Venerable Sir, he replied, and he went to those bhikkhus and told them, the teacher calls the Venerable Ones. Yes, friend, they replied, and they went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, they sat down at one side. The Blessed One then asked them, Bhikkhus, is it true that you have taken to quarreling and brawling, and are deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers? That you can neither convince each other, nor be convinced by others? That you can neither persuade each other, nor be persuaded by others? Yes, Venerable Sir. So what the Buddha is doing here is that he is calling everyone together. And the first thing is he wants to confirm that rumor that they are still quarreling. So obviously the Buddha knows that they're quarreling, since he has already taken various actions before this sutta, as I explained. But he wants to confirm that they are still quarreling. And that is a skillful means for various reasons. the first thing is that he gets them to acknowledge that they're actually engaging in this unwholesome action. So if you have to tell your teacher, yes, we are actually stabbing each other with verbal daggers, and you verbally get them to acknowledge what they are doing, then sort of that is the first step for them to actually understand what they are doing. They can no longer be in denial about the amount of fighting that is going on. So they have to verbally say, yes, we are doing all these unwholesome things. So usually when we do unwholesome things, we kind of justify them to ourselves, or we say, oh, it's not that bad, or it wasn't, that extreme. But when the Buddha puts it that strongly and he gets them to acknowledge, then they can see there is a problem, and they have actually themselves said, yes, we can see there is a problem. So he gets them to verbally acknowledge what they are doing. And the other thing also, of course, is that you can't just go by rumors. When somebody is there and criticizes other people or says something negative about other people, such as in this case that there is a conflict, you have to actually make sure that the rumor is true, because there are lots of rumors going around, and sometimes they can be true, and sometimes obviously it's just slander and people trying to put other people down. And so we see in every kind of situation, both in the Vinaya and also in the suttas, when the Buddha hears a rumor about something negative about another person, he will call that person and confirm it directly with the person that is concerned, whether or not that actually happened. And usually that person will say, if they have done whatever is said about them, they will acknowledge that they have done this, and then the Buddha will react appropriately. But we also have incidences of situations where people were just slandered. And in that case, also, it's good to bring that out in the open and to discuss it with the person who is concerned, so that the person has the opportunity to say, no, this is actually not true. And then the teacher, with his authority, can actually back up that person and sort of try to restore the reputation of that person. So it's very important to bring that out in the open and not to discuss things behind the back of the persons who are concerned. And one example that we have seen recently in our Tuesday sessions was in the last mini-series that we did about the Friends Beyond Death, so the 5 bhikkhus from Kassapa Buddha's time. And there we talked in one session about Dabbamalaputta. And for those of you who were listening in back then, Dabbamalaputta was the one who was accused by a bhikkhuni of having sexually assaulted her when he was actually innocent. So his reputation was really getting damaged, and he was really being slandered because some people were trying to get back at him. And there again, the Buddha reacted in exactly the same way. And he called Dabbamalaputta and he called everybody together, including the bhikkhuni who had slandered him, and discussed with Dabbamalaputta, and this gave Dabbamalaputta the opportunity to say out in public, in front of everybody and in front of the Buddha, that he was actually innocent. And in that way, his reputation could be restored. So this is a really skillful thing that the Buddha is doing here, involving everybody who is concerned and giving people the opportunity to either say yes or no to the rumors that are going around. So in this case, obviously, the bhikkhus are quarreling, and he gets them to acknowledge what they are doing. And then the Buddha continues, "Bhikkhus, what do you think? When you take to quarreling and brawling and are deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers, do you on that occasion maintain acts of loving kindness by body, speech, and mind, in public and in private, towards your companions in the holy life?" "No, Venerable Sir," obviously. "So, bhikkhus, when you take to quarreling and brawling and are deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers, on that occasion you do not maintain acts of loving kindness by body, speech, and mind, in public and in private, towards your companions in the holy life. Misguided man, what can you possibly know? What can you see? That you take to quarreling and brawling and are deep in disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers, that you can neither convince each other nor be convinced by others, that you can neither persuade each other nor be persuaded by others. Misguided man, that will lead to your harm and suffering for a long time." So after the Buddha got them to acknowledge what they are doing, he asked them, while you're doing all these things, quarreling and verbally abusing each other, is it possible for you to actually do your Dhamma practice? Is it possible for you to actually maintain a mind of kindness towards each other and to practice in the three kinds of actions, the actions by body, speech, and mind that are in line with metta practice, in line with loving kindness? And obviously, as we know, it's not possible to have ill will or anger and metta in the mind at the same time to cultivate both of these things. So if you cultivate anger and resentment, obviously you cannot cultivate metta at the same time. And so you cannot actually do proper Dhamma practice at this point. And the bhikkhus also acknowledge that they're not practicing loving kindness towards each other at this point. And then the Buddha says, well, misguided man, what can you possibly know? What can you see? So if you get so much enmeshed in your conflict that you are no longer able to do any kind of Dhamma practice, and as we know, this conflict has been going on for quite a while at this time. So it's not just a momentary lapse in the mindfulness of those people, which they would have recovered from fairly quickly and sort of have gone back to their practice. But in fact, they were not able to regain mindfulness over the course of a very long time and just got deeper and deeper into that conflict. And nobody actually paused to think about what they were doing and think about whether they were still practicing Dhamma or not. So the Buddha says, what can you possibly know? What can you see? So you cannot have even a tiny spark of wisdom here. So you can't possibly have any kind of deeper understanding of the Dhamma if you're not able to stop and think about what you're doing for such a long time. And then, of course, the Buddha points out how that will lead to one's harm and suffering for a long time. So obviously, if you continue to cultivate these kind of bad karma by body, speech, and mind over a prolonged period of time, so cultivating anger and resentment and all these kinds of defilements over a prolonged period of time, that leads to a lot of harm and suffering in the future, especially if the object of your anger and resentment is another monk, another Dhamma practitioner. So hopefully, normally, a Dhamma practitioner or another monastic should be somebody who is reasonably pure and has reasonably good aspirations. So cultivating anger towards such a person obviously has a much stronger karmic consequence than cultivating anger towards somebody who is actually a bad person. And also, considering the kind of people that they are already monastics. They have already gone forth and they have already had these high aspirations to practice the Dhamma. We also have to be clear that as monastics, the kind of karma that we make, both in the positive and the negative sense, is much stronger than if we were lay people or people who are not really committed to Dhamma practice. Because as monastics, we are also role model for others. And we can either inspire other people or we can really damage the faith of other people depending on how we behave. So if we behave in a positive, uplifting way and we show the characteristics of metta and wisdom and we exemplify the Dhamma in the world, then the kind of good karma that we make is much stronger than that of an average person. But if we quarrel and fight in public, and especially for such a long period of time, and if we show anger and resentment to the public and show that we're not able actually to use the Dhamma in a skillful way to overcome all these defilements, then that will really damage the faith of a lot of people and really harm the Buddha's teaching and the Buddha's sasana and the reputation of the sangha. So the kind of bad karma that we can make as a monastic is also much, much stronger than that of an ordinary person. So as monastics, we have to be aware of how we are acting. And so quarreling in that way, especially in this really extreme way, leads to harm and suffering for a long time in the future because the karma that we are making is so severe. And that's what the Buddha is pointing out here. And then the Buddha continues. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, there are these 6 principles of cordiality that create love and respect and conduce to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. What are the 6? So now the Buddha is starting to teach them about community harmony and showing them a way out of their conflict. And these 6 principles of cordiality are very, very famous. They occur in other suttas as well. Excuse me. So they occur in many other suttas as well. And they're very important. And I think they're also very, very applicable to all kinds of communities, not only Dhamma communities. So if you have any kind of communities, any kind of groups that you think would benefit from a bit more harmony, then you can try applying those 6 principles. And hopefully that will have a good effect. So what are the 6? Here, a bhikkhu maintains bodily acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards his companions in the holy life. This is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. Again, a bhikkhu maintains verbal acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards his companions in the holy life. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. Again, a bhikkhu maintains mental acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards his companions in the holy life. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. So the first 3 principles of cordiality, or the 3 principles that lead to community harmony, are the practice of metta in the 3 ways of acting, so by body, by speech, and by mind. So obviously this directly addresses the problem that the Buddha just identified, that the monks are not practicing metta towards each other. So the first 3 principles to establish a harmonious community is for everybody to speak and act and think towards the other person in a friendly, supportive way. So of course, if you act towards each other in a friendly way and you speak towards each other with friendly words in a gentle manner, in a supportive way, and if you think in a good way about each other, that will already establish an atmosphere that is very friendly, very welcoming, and that makes everybody feel much more at ease. And so sometimes we think it doesn't matter what we think, because nobody can read our mind. Most people cannot read our mind. So we can internally cultivate a lot of anger and resentment and then try to be very friendly towards that person outwardly. But that doesn't work. So the mental acts are already very important as well, because they also, the mental energy that we cultivate often shows in our body language or our facial expressions, or people can just sense the kind of energy that we are bringing into a room. So everything has to start with the mental acts that we cultivate. And we really have to practice the discipline not to indulge in those resentful thoughts and those resentful defilements or defilements of ill will towards other people if we feel triggered and if we feel angry, because they are actually the basis for the speech and the bodily acts that we do. And so thinking good thoughts about each other is the basis for community harmony. And then, of course, verbal acts, I think that's self-explanatory, speaking in friendly, supportive ways. And then also bodily acts. And these can be very small things. It doesn't have to be something big. So if you live in a community, it can just be small things, like opening the door when somebody wants to come in, or when somebody carries heavy things and just go and give a hand. Or if somebody has their laundry outside and it starts raining, just bring them in. Like really small things, day-to-day things that we can do to support each other and to be friendly towards each other and care about each other. And as it says here, you should do that in public and in private. So whether somebody sees what you're doing and whether somebody notices what you're doing isn't actually that important. So maybe you cleaned up the kitchen and nobody noticed that you were doing it. Still, that's an act of metta that will contribute to the overall atmosphere of the place. And hopefully at some other point, somebody else will reciprocate and do something nice. And everybody in that way sort of maintains the beneficial atmosphere of that community. And also, when you talk about the other person, so when you cultivate verbal acts of loving kindness, whether you do that in public, so whether that person hears you talking in a nice way about themselves, or whether you do that in private, sort of behind the back of that person, to when the person isn't there, still you should cultivate acts of loving kindness. So even if the person isn't in the room or the person doesn't hear what you're saying, still don't talk about them in a bad way, don't slander them, don't complain about them to outsiders. If you don't have anything nice to say, then maybe just, keep quiet and don't put other people of your community down, even if they don't hear it, because that will kind of impact on the entire community. So these are the three first principles: maintaining bodily, verbal, and mental acts of loving kindness towards each other. And as you can see, this isn't limited to monastic communities. Any kind of community can benefit from these kind of these ways of acting. And then the Buddha continues with the fourth principle, and he says, again, a bhikkhu uses things in common with his virtuous companions in the holy life. Without making reservations, he shares with them any gain of a kind that accords with the Dhamma and has been obtained in a way that accords with the Dhamma, including even the mere contents of his bowl. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. So here in this fourth principle, the Buddha says that sharing is a very, very important part of the community, using things together, having a common property that everybody can use, and making your things available to others. So, of course, the Buddha here also says these are the people you share with have to be virtuous people. So if you just share your things with any random person, of course, that could mean that your things get lost or are broken, or people don't really care and they get damaged. So the Buddha here says you're virtuous companions. And of course, in a monastic community, you should hope that most people are virtuous. And if they are, then without making reservations, you can share with them. And of course, in a monastic community, that is very important, because monastics, many of them live without money, and everybody makes a very strong commitment to living very simply with the least amount of personal material possessions. But if you don't have many material possessions, you're very dependent on other people, on sharing things and on other people giving you things, especially if you don't have money. So you can't just go out and buy the things that you need. So in most monastic communities, people have very few individual possessions, but still the community as a whole has things that everybody can use. So let's say most communities, for example, if you want to make ropes, because that's the first requisite, ropes, if you want to make ropes, there is a sewing room, and in that sewing room, there are sewing machines and thread and cloth and so on. So that belongs to everybody together. So that's shared between the whole community. Or if you get sick, another requisite, medicinal requisites, there is a room for sick people, and there are medicines there. So not everybody has to have their individual things. Everybody shares the same things. And if you need it, you just go and get it. So that is what really supports community harmony, because then there are no individual differences between people. There's not one person who's very rich and another person who's very poor, and who then has to be jealous of the rich person, or who really needs to have stuff, but the other person doesn't give it. So let's say somebody is sick and they can't get medicine, and the other person has it but doesn't share it. So these kind of things don't happen if you just openly share with everybody. And that really gives a strong cohesion to the group if everybody is on the same level and everybody can use things in common. And of course, the Buddha here also says the things you obtain have to be in accordance with Dhamma. So it can't be something that has been stolen or has been acquired with some illegitimate means, through fraud, through deceiving others, or people not really giving it voluntarily. So the things that you use should have been obtained in a lawful way and in accordance with the Dhamma, so that there is no conflict arising just out of the things that are there. And then the Buddha says, well, you can share literally everything, even just what he calls here the contents of your bowl. So whatever you gained on alms round, even down to the food that you get for this particular day. And so in most communities, you can't really share the contents of your bowl, because people aren't really going on alms round. So they're eating in the monastery kitchen, and everybody has access to the same kind of food that was prepared in the monastery kitchen. But I have actually lived in communities where we all went on alms round every day, and we were really dependent on what people were giving. And because I was in a Western country, it was really very changeable. One day there was a lot, and many other days there was not that much. And there we could actually practice sharing everything down to this level. So if somebody gained something special, they would meet up with everybody else and share. Or if somebody didn't gain anything, then the other person would give them half of the contents of their bowl, even though maybe they also didn't have that much. So that was really, I think, a factor I felt that was making that community very strong. So there are still communities that practice even down to sharing the contents of their bowl. And I think that is really a principle that leads to a lot of community harmony. And then the Buddha continues with the fifth principle, and he says, again, a bhikkhu dwells both in public and in private, possessing in common with his companions in the holy life those virtues that are unbroken, untorn, unblotched, unmottled, liberating, commended by the wise, not misapprehended, and conducive to concentration or samadhi. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. So here now, the Buddha says another principle that is really important for community harmony is that everybody is virtuous. So everybody keeps sila, at least the 5 precepts. And of course, in monastic communities, much more precepts, and that everybody keeps vinaya in the same way. And we have already seen being virtuous is also very important, to be able to share everything in common with each other. So that was already mentioned in the principle the 4th principle, the one we discussed just now. But here now in the 5th one, this is explicit, that everybody needs to be virtuous, because that really prevents conflict in the community. If everybody follows the 5 precepts or higher precepts, then if people don't kill, don't steal, and so on, then that leads to harmony, because people don't have to be afraid of each other. And people know that they won't be lied to, they won't be stolen from, there's not going to be any sexual attacks on anyone, nobody's getting drunk and out of control. So that already leads to a lot of peace in the community, because those kind of incidents are not going to happen. And of course, if you have those virtues and they are unbroken, and you can rely on the other person being a good person, a wholesome and virtuous person, and you can trust them, and those are trustworthy people, that means that because you can trust them, the community is going to be much more stable, and it's going to be much more calm and peaceful and harmonious for that reason. Because they are all reliable people. And as the text here says, those virtues, they also lead to concentration, so they lead to samadhi, and that means they enable you to access the higher stages on the path. So a community that is virtuous kind of all have the same outlook on life, they have the same values, the same things that are important to them, and all of them sort of support each other, developing those higher stages. And of course, you can practice on your own, but this is really the value of a community, that when everybody practices together, then you can also strengthen each other. So if somebody has maybe a bad day and they feel like today they don't really want to keep the higher precepts, for the 5 precepts, obviously that really doesn't apply in the same way, but for the higher precepts, Maybe somebody feels like, oh, today I'm so hungry, I want to eat in the afternoon or whatever. I really want to listen to music or whatever. But you see that around you, everybody else is following the precepts. So there's some kind of very good group pressure that sort of helps you to also keep your own precepts. If you have a bad day, so that group energy will just carry you through those difficult times. And then the last principle of cordiality is, again, a bhikkhu dwells both in public and in private, possessing in common with his companions in the holy life that view that is noble and emancipating and leads the one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. This too is a principle of cordiality that creates love and respect and conduces to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. These are the 6 principles of cordiality that create love and respect and conduce to cohesion, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. Of these 6 principles of cordiality, the chief, the most cohesive, the most unifying is this view that is noble and emancipating, and which leads the one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. Just as the chief, the most cohesive, the most unifying part of a pinnacled house is the pinnacle itself, so too, of these 6 principles of cordiality, the chief, the most cohesive, and the most unifying is this view that is noble and emancipating, and which leads the one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. So now the last of these principles is having right view, or if you want to apply this to any other community, a non-dharmic community, having the same view. In a dharmic community, obviously having right view that aligns with the Dhamma, view that aligns with the Buddha's teaching. And the Buddha says this is the most fundamental of those 6 principles, the one that underlies all the other ones, and the one that if you have right view, it will lead you all the way to the destruction of suffering, to the end goal of Buddhist practice. And of course, if you have right view, that means you have a like-minded community. You have people that really have the same outlook on life, that have the same values, and that have the same priorities in life. If you all have different views, obviously, for one, that will lead to a lot of conflict because you're constantly debating about your views. And the other thing is also the community will just have a lot of very different objectives. So you're not properly unified. You don't all go in the same direction. And for that reason, obviously, the community isn't as unified and as harmonious as they would be if the people were all like-minded. And of course, if you have right view, that means you understand about risks that qualify each and everything that is in samsara, everything that happens in samsara. Those 3 characteristics are impermanence, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. And you understand about the law of cause and effect. You understand about karma, the law of karma. You understand about rebirth, and everybody has that same view and that same outlook on life. Then that will make your community a lot stronger. And also because this kind of view is a very, very Buddhist view, and people outside of Buddhism don't usually have this view. It also makes you appreciate the people around you a lot more, because you know that you will not find practitioners outside of your community that support you in this view and that have the same view. But here you have found people who have the same view, and that's really difficult to find. And so you appreciate those people a lot more. And even if they have some flaws, even if they have some kind of habit that might trigger you, that underlying same outlook on life and that underlying like-mindedness in that respect. And you also understand how important it is to have those like-minded people that support you in your right view and your practice, will make you value them and will enable you to actually let go of any small resentment that could arise because they have some kind of small behaviors that trigger you. And so if you reflect in this way, and there's one member of your community who didn't clean the toilet properly, just as in this case at Kosambi, then this is a small thing that you can let go when you see that actually overall they are a metaphor person, they are a person that shares and that has the same virtues and that also has the same view as yourself, because such people are really hard to find. And so finding them and having a community with them is really, really valuable. For this reason, right view is the most important of those 6 principles and the one that underlies all the other principles. So this is the Buddha's teaching on community harmony. From here on, he moves on into his teaching of stream entry. And we are going to look at the teaching of stream entry and the 7 factors of stream entry next time. For today, I'm going to end our sutta discussion at this point. And if you have any questions or comments, I will go there. So Taylor asks, I'm not sure what sutta is this. As I mentioned, this is Majjhima Nikaya 48, the Kosambi Sutta, and there is a link in the live chat. This is from a book called the Majjhima Nikaya, or the Middle Length Discourses. And of course, I recommend reading this book. You can get a translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi and a translation by Bhante Sujato. And the Bhante Sujato's translation is also freely available on Sutta Central. As I mentioned, there is already a link in the live chat, so that should be fairly easy to find. And Buddha Ruchi says, it's not a question but a comment, friendliness towards those whose behavior offends us, reflection on our own feelings of offense. These principles are super. Yeah, I agree. Those principles are great. That's why they are repeated so many times in the suttas. Because even though we all want community harmony, we are very bad at actually establishing community harmony. And even though we really want everybody to be nice to us, we still have our own defilements and constantly engage in thinking negative thoughts and criticizing other people, and also criticizing ourselves and putting other people down and putting ourselves down. And having our perfectionist mindset where we constantly notice our own flaws and the flaws of other people instead of just practicing friendliness and forgiving ourselves and others. So, of course, that's why the Buddha put metta 3 times in 3 of the 6 principles, to really drive the point home that metta is so fundamental to community harmony and to the practice. As the Buddha, the Buddha really singled out metta practice here in this whole teaching as the fundament of the practice. Even before he taught the 6 principles of cordiality, when he was just talking to the monks and asking them if they were practicing in the right way, he pointed out that they were unable to practice metta while they were quarreling. So he really singled out metta here as the thing that defines the practice in those circumstances. And yeah, as you say, friendliness towards those whose behavior offends us. And especially if we know, as in this case, that the other people are actually Dhamma practitioners and they're actually genuinely good people and they actually want to practice, and we are actually quite like-minded in that respect. And the differences between us are quite minor. And often it's the small things that trigger us the most, such as in this case, somebody not really cleaning the toilet properly. Or when we're living together, there's so many small things in our daily life that can trigger us. Especially things like cleanliness or small kind of weird behaviors of other people. So it's usually the small things that cause a conflict, not those huge differences. So being able to let go of all these small triggers and reflecting on how good those people actually are, and seeing the 99% of goodness in their character instead of the 1% of faults, is really something that is very valuable. And I think especially as Westerners, people should do that more, because we're so much trained to always be perfectionists and to always focus on what doesn't work instead of focusing on all the things that are already really good. So I think that's really important. And then Sud asks, Dear Venerable, How does one approach a situation where a loved one complains about another person? And if you agree, then it can be slander. But if you disagree, then it destroys your harmony with them. Yeah, I think it's a difficult situation. So I think as part of the practice, I think if you're skillful, you can try to lead that person to see a bigger picture. So sometimes it can be helpful to not totally oppose that person, but to say, yeah, you're right in that respect, but can you see it in this way too? Or you can try to agree with them in some way and use that agreement and use their sort of emotional feeling of closeness towards you to open up their perspective a little more and try to show them that there's actually more to that other person than just the negative part that they are focusing on. So if their focus is too narrow on just one mistake that the other person made or one negative character trait that they have, you can sort of try to open up their perspective a little more and say, well, yeah, this is a negative point, and if that is a valid point, also that's not lying, that's not breaking the precept, to acknowledge that that's happening, but then tell them, but they also have a lot of positive qualities. And also, if they are a Dhamma practitioner, or even if they're not a Dhamma practitioner, but somebody who's genuinely interested in having a happy life, then you can show them that cultivating anger towards that other person isn't actually helpful for anyone, and they're just harming themselves by cultivating this anger, because it makes themselves unhappy and makes themselves tense, it makes them angry. It just having all these negative emotions in the mind all the time really drains you and wears you out. So if you can explain this to your loved one, then maybe that loved one will also be able to let go of that anger, or at least sort of diminish it a little bit and come out of that negative mindset. Because you also wish well for your loved one. You don't want your loved one to engage in all this negative karma all the time, and in this negative thinking all the time. So helping them come out of this mindset also will be very beneficial. So that might be an approach that you could try, and hopefully that might help both the loved one and yourself and that other person. So Buddharuchi has another comment, and he said, he or she, I don't know, or they, says, I think too that when we are offended in the ways described, we are being offered a look at our own flaws. What do you think? Yeah, I think often what triggers us is something that we actually don't want to acknowledge in ourselves, a character trait that we might have ourselves, but we're trying to cover up and not show to the public and not acknowledge that there's something that we should actually look at and deal with. So something that really, really triggers you, often it's quite valuable to see if you have a very similar character trait, or if there's something, also if there's something going on, why that triggers you so much. What is the thing that really offends you so much? And so, for example, in the case at Kosambi, why are you so much attached to the cleanliness in the bathroom? Or why are you so much attached to somebody confessing this really minor Vinaya rule? Why are you so much attached to following those minor Vinaya rules? So I'm not saying that following Vinaya rules is bad, but if you get so worked up about such a minor thing, then you can look at what's going on there. Where is your own attachment? Where is your own clinging? And how does that lead to suffering? And Sud has another follow-up question, and they say, how can one make a loving kindness not tiring? Is it an aspect of loving kindness that it can tire one out, since this can cause more irritation after one is tired? So usually loving kindness is tiring if it's not very strong yet. So if you have fairly strong irritation in the mind, and you try to overcome that with loving kindness, then your loving kindness is kind of rubbing up and triggering the irritation, and you need to have a lot of energy to keep the loving kindness going, because your habit pattern of irritation is so strong that it takes a lot of energy to overcome that. As you get better with loving kindness practice, that you form a new habit pattern, and loving kindness becomes a natural state of mind. And then because your defilements are not that strong anymore, the irritation gets less, and the energy you need to keep it going is much less, because it's such a strong habit pattern. And because you need less energy, then it's also less tiring. So one thing to make it less tiring is it a lot. So the stronger you form that habit pattern in the mind of loving kindness, the more natural and the more easy it becomes, and the less energy you need and the less tiring it is. So if you have very strong irritation in the mind, if you only practice then it's really difficult to cultivate loving kindness. But if you practice loving kindness all the time, especially in situations when you don't feel very irritated, then the habit pattern is already strong when you get irritated, and then it's not that difficult anymore. So if you find it tiring, practice it a lot more, especially in situations when you're not triggered, when you already feel calm. And yes, it can cause more irritation after you're tired, because then it is much more difficult to keep it going. When you're tired, you already feel tense, you feel resentment, and then keeping metta going is difficult. The only way to deal with that is to practice it more and to make it a habit. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. So this is the last question, and I see Gita is also here, and she says, sorry, she was in meditation, so I'm glad you could join us at this point. And if you want, of course, there's the recording. You can still follow up later. And also our time is up, so we can finish for today. We will finish as usual with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I wish you all a happy holiday season. If you're with loved ones, I hope you have very harmonious relations and you have a good time together. And I will see you all next week, hopefully. Have a wonderful day and have a wonderful week.